The green conscience theory, a new interpretation of evil, morality, and the human condition. 1. Abstract. This theory proposes that evil is not the opposite of good, nor its absence, but the inevitable consequence of humanity's limitless desire for life, pleasure, and perfection, when the inner voice of conscience falls silent. Every civilization, every individual, hides a quiet hunger for boundless satisfaction, to eat better, rise higher, and love more completely. Evil is born not from cruelty, but from the moment we choose comfort over conscience. 2. The genesis of evil. Human beings are born with desire, the primal will to live, to possess, to enjoy. Even a 1-year-old child fights for a toy, crying as a weapon of domination, and even a dying old man, trapped in a failing body, still carries the same hunger, the wish to grasp what he can no longer reach. Desire is endless. Life is not. Evil arises where this endless force meets the boundary of conscience. Conscience is not divine law. It is an internal equilibrium. A whisper asking, "You can, but should you?" Yet this whisper speaks with different strength in different souls. Some hear it clearly, others silence it willingly. 3. The 3 axes of desire. Human craving always orbits 3 basic needs. 1. Hunger, the drive to consume. 2. Power, the drive to control. 3. Love, the drive to possess beauty. When these drives seek sufficiency, they sustain life. When they seek perfection, they destroy it. Why eat bread when I could feast on tender meat? Why be a soldier when I could be a general? Why love simply when I could own the most beautiful being alive? This obsession with the best, the total, the ultimate, is the birthplace of evil. Perfectionism without conscience transforms desire into devouring. 4. The social mechanism of evil. Evil is not a private affair. It is a collective ritual. Societies, too, silence their conscience to preserve peace and pleasure. They declare victims, witches, outcasts, minorities, as symbols of corruption, so the rest can feel pure. Every civilization needs its witch to burn, its scapegoat to erase guilt, its silence to keep the feast going. Thus, the green conscience theory argues, evil is the comfort of the collective when it sacrifices its own conscience. 5. The parable of Wicked. Gregory Maguire's Wicked and its cinematic offspring are not mere fantasies. They are maps of moral anatomy. The talking animals represent the voice of conscience, silenced by political will. The government of Oz stands for the social order built upon collective appetite. Elphaba, the green-skinned girl, is conscience itself, born from sin, cursed by awareness and condemned by the crowd. Her mother's infidelity gave her birth. Her green skin is the stain of desire, the mark of a pleasure that defeated restraint. Yet from that forbidden act came a being who sees, who feels, who hears the silenced. She is not the child of sin. She is the child of its memory. Green is not the color of evil. It is the color of the conscience born from guilt. 6. The tragedy of 2 goods. Elphaba and Glinda, 2 girls, 2 forces, are the divided human spirit. Elphaba is truth. Glinda is comfort. At first they coexist. Later they fracture. They are both good, both sincere, both yearning for justice. And yet, their pursuit of goodness destroys their bond. Glinda wants moral perfection. Elphaba wants moral truth. And in chasing different kinds of good, they turn into enemies. This is the most painful revelation of the green conscience theory. Evil is not born from bad intentions, but from the collision of 2 sincere goods that refuse to compromise. When perfection becomes more important than empathy, conscience is sacrificed on the altar of virtue. 7. The fall of society. Oz rejects Elphaba not because she is wicked, but because she reminds them of their silence. They cannot eat peacefully while the green girl speaks. They call her evil so they can feel good. That is how every civilization survives. Not by conquering evil, but by exiling conscience. Societies do not destroy their monsters. They create them to protect their comfort. 8. The universal equation. In the moral mathematics of the green conscience, desire, conscience, not evil. Desire plus conscience, awareness. Collective desire, collective conscience are the scapegoat. Evil is the price of silence. Every time we choose serenity over sincerity, we write another witch's death warrant. 9. Implications for storytelling. For storytellers, this theory transforms the moral landscape of narrative. The villain is not necessarily the liar, the killer, or the tyrant, but often the one who embodies the conscience everyone else abandons. From Prometheus to Lucifer, from Frankenstein to Elphaba, the evil one is merely the soul that refuses the comfort of collective blindness. Tid Final Manifesto. Humanity is not divided between good and evil. It is divided between those who sleep peacefully and those who cannot, between those who silence the inner voice and those who let it scream. Evil is the silence that follows the cry of conscience, and every society, to keep its comfort, builds its fire and calls it justice. Epilogue for the 2025 film critique. Wicked. Part 2 offers nothing new to art, only to commerce. Its glittering choreography, its thunderous songs, its emerald euphoria are all tools of sedation. The true story worth telling is not what happens on screen, but what the screen refuses to show. The moment when we, the audience, choose entertainment over reflection. So this year, we do not critique a film. We critique a civilization that no longer wants to feel. Wicked. Part 2, 2025, The Death of Conscience in Color. A StoryForge Academy critique based on the green conscience theory, opening manifesto. This film cannot be criticized, because it is already hollow. To critique Wicked. Part 2 is not to analyze a movie, but to expose the silence of a civilization that no longer wants to feel. 1. The illusion of beauty without conscience. John M. Chu's Wicked. Part 2 is not a work of art. It is a mirror polished until no reflection remains. Every frame is designed to please. Every sound calibrated to comfort. The film does not challenge the viewer. It sedates them. Its world glitters, but that glitter coats a spiritual void. It is a masterpiece of surface. The perfect symbol of an age that mistakes spectacle for meaning. What we see is beauty without conscience. A choreography of denial. The Emerald City shines brighter than ever, yet its heart no longer beats. 2. Why there is nothing left to critique, through the lens of the green conscience. Because it no longer risks anything. The film knows exactly what the audience desires, which emotion to trigger, which melody to recall, which tear to release at which minute. It has mastered prediction, and in doing so, lost surprise. In the language of the green conscience, this is desire without restraint, pleasure without reflection. Cinema in its highest form must disturb. Wicked, Part 2 only reassures. It does not ask why beauty matters. It merely sells it, and that is the first sign of artistic death. 2. Because it has erased its own moral core. The first installment at least carried the faint pulse of an ethical question. Was the witch truly wicked, or was the world unworthy of her conscience? Here, even that question has been dissolved into spectacle. Every tragedy is designed to heal instantly, every conflict to end in applause. By the end, nothing hurts, and nothing lingers. The film hides its conscience behind the noise of its own songs. Its colors are bright enough to blind the mind. 3. Because it is the product of the very evil, it pretends to condemn. Wicked. Part 2 tells the story of a society that destroys the different, but it was built by the same machinery of mass culture that punishes originality. It preaches diversity while serving uniformity, markets empathy while manufacturing conformity. Behind its emerald curtains lie contracts, branding, algorithms, and merchandise, the industrial religion of modern art. It sells goodness as a consumer product, and thus becomes the perfect embodiment of the green conscience paradox. A world that commodifies virtue while silencing truth. 4. Because it seeks to change nothing. Real art provokes discomfort. It awakens the conscience even when it hurts the heart. This film, however, seeks only approval from investors, parents, teenagers, and social media trends alike. But art that pleases everyone transforms no one. This is the death of conscience on a cultural scale, a civilization that fears the sting of truth more than the pain of emptiness. 3. The green conscience as the true subject. The tragedy is not on screen. It is in the audience. We, too, have become part of the silent crowd that once called Elphaba wicked. The green girl was burned long ago. Now her ashes are reshaped into plastic toys. The witch survives, but only as merchandise. Thus, Wicked. Part 2 is not a sequel. It is a confession. It confesses the exhaustion of imagination, the triumph of pleasure, and the burial of conscience beneath the glow of perfect light. Society no longer kills its witches. It sings about them, sells their image, and calls the silence progress. 4. The final equation. In the moral mathematics of this age, desire, conscience, or entertainment. Conscience, desire, isolation. Desire plus conscience, art. Wicked Part 2 chooses the first formula. It gives us pleasure without pain, meaning without struggle, emotion without truth. It is the most comfortable kind of evil, the kind we pay to experience. 5. Closing reflection. This film, dazzling and empty, should not be judged as cinema but as evidence. Evidence of a culture that has traded courage for comfort, conscience for consumption, and imagination for the soft glow of approval. The world has learned to sing its guilt away. Wicked is no longer wicked, we are. In 2025, the story no longer needs analysis. It needs awakening. And that awakening begins the moment we realize that the witch we burned was never Elphaba. It was our own conscience, painted green so we could pretend it wasn't human. The Death of Conscience in Color. A philosophical essay from StoryForge Academy, based on the green conscience theory. When the screen fades to green for the last time in Wicked. Part 2, 2025. We are expected to feel hope. Yet what we truly experience, if we still have the courage to feel, is emptiness. The story has ended, the witch is gone. The audience applauds, and once again, conscience falls asleep. The economic dream. Let us be honest, Wicked. Part 2 will earn its millions. It will trend across TikTok, sparkle on Instagram, echo through shopping malls and playlists, because that is what the modern market rewards. The comfort of color and the safety of song. This film does not fail. It succeeds perfectly at the wrong thing. It transforms moral complexity into consumable emotion. It sells healing instead of truth. It teaches that every wound can be closed with melody. When entertainment becomes therapy, art stops being conscience. We no longer confront ourselves. We self-soothe. We do not ask what is wrong with the world. We ask which playlist can make us forget. That is how a civilization goes blind with its eyes wide open. The soft face of evil. Evil no longer wears horns. It wears production design. It sells tickets, wins awards, and raises money for charity. It tells us that we are perfect as we are, so we never have to change. It calls us seen, but never responsible. It promises empathy, without consequence, diversity without discomfort, peace without cost. This is the new theology of the screen. Forgiveness without confession, grace without guilt, pleasure without pain. It is the modern miracle, the miracle of anesthesia. The society of sleep. We live in an era that fears awakening more than it fears nightmares. The screen has become our lullaby. Every generation once had art that shouted, "Wake up." Ours whispers, "Lie down, you've earned it." We buy the ticket, enter the darkness, let the green light wash over us, and call that feeling enlightenment. But true enlightenment hurts, it burns. It demands that we face what we have done to one another. That is why the witch had to die. She reminded us of what we erased, the animals we silenced, the voices we mocked, the pain we refused to see. Her death was the price of our comfort, the mirror of 2025. Wicked Part 2 is no longer about Oz. It is about us. A generation scrolling through empathy, liking conscience in the comments but never living it. We wear activism as fashion. We perform virtue like choreography. We consume compassion in cinematic doses. Just enough to feel human, never enough to become one. The witch on the screen is green. But the real witch, the real outcast, is anyone who still dares to ask why. The final lesson. The green conscience theory reduces this to a simple moral equation. Desire, conscience, makes evil. Desire plus conscience wants awareness. Collective desire, collective conscience, anchors scapegoat. Us sacrificed its witch. We sacrifice our thinkers. Different century, same ritual. To keep the feast going, someone must always be burned. Comfort demands casualties, the rebirth of the green conscience. Yet buried under the glitter, the green conscience still breathes. Each time a young viewer asks, "Why do they call her wicked?" a spark returns. Each time a filmmaker chooses silence over noise, a seed of conscience grows. Each time an artist refuses to flatter, truth survives another day. Conscience never truly dies. It waits for the next brave heart to hear it again. Closing reflection. Wicked, Part 2 cannot be meaningfully criticized because criticism belongs to the living. And this film is already a ghost. A beautiful and lucrative ghost. To critique it is not to review cinema, but to read an autopsy report on imagination. It is proof that our culture has learned to sing its guilt away, that we have replaced courage with color and truth with choreography. But the story does not end in Oz. It ends here, with us, deciding whether we will continue to dream or finally wake up. The witch was never the enemy. She was the last honest witness. The green was never evil. It was the shade of our buried conscience. And perhaps one day, when the music stops and the lights dim, we will hear it whisper again, not to entertain us, but to remind us who we are. StoryForge Academy and the Green Conscience Theory.